This is Reynolds Podcast, The Creative Mindset.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Creative Mindset, a podcast about what the future holds at the intersection of creativity and technology. I'm Ray Namoto, the founding partner of I&Co, a global innovation firm based in New York, Tokyo, and Singapore. In the past few years, we have seen two significant events that have forced us to rethink how we work. One is COVID-19. This came out of nowhere. In just a matter of weeks, it spread around the world and shut down offices, companies, and businesses for a month at a time. Certain trends, such as remote work, were happening gradually, but COVID-19 accelerated those changes that would have taken 10 years down to 10 months. The other event that happened was the introduction of ChatGPT from OpenAI in the fall of 2022. AI wasn't necessarily a new idea or new technology. In fact, it's been around since the 1950s. But it's really in the last 2 years that it evolved into a tool that general public can relate to and use on a daily basis. Today's guest is Rishad Tobaccowala. He's someone whom I admired for more than 10 years because we ran our professional lives in similar circles within the marketing and creative industry, and I was very aware of the work he was doing. Back then, I was a chief creative officer of a digital agency called AKQA, and Rishad, the chief strategy officer of Publicis, one of the largest global advertising agency networks, so we competed for some of the same clients from Fortune 500 companies around the world. In the last several years, after retiring from his day-to-day role at Publicis, Rishad started to publish a weekly newsletter during COVID called The Future Does Not Fit into the Container of the Past, and within a couple of years, he has amassed over 30,000 readers, which I am one. With more than 4 decades of experience leading multiple organizations, Rishad writes, speaks, teaches, and advises, specializing in helping people, teams, and organizations reinvent themselves to remain relevant in changing times. He's a best-selling author, and his second book, called Rethinking Work, Seismic Changes in the Where, When, and Why, is being published in February of 2025. Although Rishad and I have known so many people in common, our path never crossed directly. One day, a couple of months ago, I finally got the nerve to write to him via his newsletter and asked if he'd be open to meeting up for lunch, to which he responded within minutes and said yes. He's one of the clearest thinkers and speakers I've ever come across. As you may notice, he speaks in an extremely organized manner by utilizing lists and bullet points, making it easy for the listeners to have a clear takeaway. In this 2-part conversation with Rishad, we explore what the future holds for work. In part 1, we focus on the seismic changes happening in the workplace today and what that means for companies and organizations. So let's get started. Rishad, good to see you. Where does this podcast find you?
It finds me in my home study in Chicago, where I got to from your city of New York, or one of your cities of New York, where I was this morning, and I came in this afternoon for this.
Oh, you were in New York City this morning?
I was in New York City this morning because I did a live podcast with David Kenny for my What Next.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So it'll be also on video. So for that, we do it live in, as I was in New York. He came in from Boston, I came in from Chicago, and we did it there.
Oh, I see. That's a double thank you for making the time, especially when you had to travel and when you are just off the plane.
No problem.
What I wanted to start the conversation with, as it comes to this changing landscape of work, you talk about different shifts.
So between 2020 and 2030, work will change more than it has in the last 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And most people are not prepared for that, and they're fixating on things like getting people back to the office, which is the completely wrong question. Okay. So what are the 5 driving forces? And these are true around the world, but different countries are in different, degrees. So the first is what I basically call societal shifts.
Yeah.
And societal shifts are 3, and this is very true in Japan. Declining population, aging population, and different mindsets about work among older people and younger people.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are these societal shifts. And in the US, 66% of Gen Z who have a full-time job have a side hustle or side gig. So 2 out of 3 people who have a full-time job in the United States who are Gen Z have a side hustle or side gig with which they make money. Now, in some cases, it may be to make the rent. In others, it may be a passion project. They design something and sell it on Etsy or set up a shop on Shopify or whatever they do. And so the reality of it is what people are basically saying, I need optionality because I don't think my company can be trusted to look after me for the entire life. That's true even in Japan with, so somewhat of a decline of the salary man, etc. So in effect, there are these societal shifts. The second group of shifts, not surprisingly, are technological. And AI is going to make knowledge free and it's going to change the very nature of work. But there'll be more than AI. There'll be blockchain and XR and AR and VR and things like that.
Yeah.
The third one is the rise of marketplaces. And this, most people don't understand how impactful it is. So Shopify is a marketplace. Etsy is a marketplace. Deal is a marketplace. Amazon's a marketplace. Upwork is a marketplace. So today, a small company can plug and play and look really big, or an individual can look really big without actually having to put a lot of money or infrastructure. So the benefits of scale become less and less in different industries. So a lot of people ask me, you have a book and you have podcasts and you have Substack and you have an advising career and you have a speaking career. How many people in your company? And the answer is 0. Now, it doesn't mean I'm not working with a lot of people, right? But I plug into different marketplaces. I have a HarperCollins who helps me produce my book. I use Substack technology for my podcast. We use Spotify and Apple and StreamYards like you do. And so the entire idea is I have the same access to anything else. For $80 a month, I have the same AI technology as the world's best companies. In fact, better, because I can use all the LLMs and they tend to only allow their people to use one. So you begin to have the marketplaces. Then you have this whole rise of gig work, side hustles. In the United States, next year, more people will work for themselves than work for a company. More than 50%. Okay. And that's going to increase to what I believe will be either 2/3, 1/3, or 75-25 by the end of the decade. And then the last one really is the long-term impact of COVID on people's mindsets about what work is. So 2-3 years of COVID, people were sitting at home, seeing people die, trying to figure out what exactly their bosses did. So a lot of people in the world say, should I be actually fixating on how to find time for my life at work, or should I try to find time for work in my life? Emotionally different ways of looking at it, marketplaces, gig work, new technologies, and the societal impact of declining populations, aging populations, and different mindsets means everything about work changes. And those are the 5 driving factors. And my book shows how they are. And obviously, some of them have deeper implications in some countries and less in others.
Yeah. Who benefits the most?
My book is very optimistic. And it basically says if people have the right mindset and the ability to learn, this is likely to help everybody. Okay. By everybody, young people, old people, large companies, small companies, across different industries. But what are the things that need to basically be done for it to help everybody? So if you are a large company in many industries and you don't start learning how to operate like a small company, it'll hurt you.
Right.
Okay. Because the benefits of scale are less and less. And so you basically have obviously some problems with scale, like it's slow and all of that bureaucratic. So large companies have to reinvent themselves to operate like smaller companies.
Yeah.
Now that is true in many industries. It may not be true in obviously semiconductor and chip manufacturing, but in others.
Yeah.
The other one is for everybody to recognize that they have to learn continuously because the half-life of knowledge is decaying really fast.
Right.
The third is this is actually going to help people, and this will probably make some parts of the advanced economy a little bit angry. It's going to help the advanced economy, but it's also going to basically help a lot of people who did not have access to certain things that they can. So I'll give you an idea. What does that mean? A marketplace that people aren't aware of, or people don't talk about, they're aware of, is GitHub. And GitHub is where you have, coding and sharing of code, etc.
Yeah.
But because of AI, GitHub, which is owned by Microsoft, has this thing called Copilot that helps you write code. So now you can actually write code without knowing how to write code. It doesn't mean great code writers are not important, etc., right? But as a result, the CEO of GitHub basically says the people who are going to be using GitHub to write code without knowing code are going to climb from 100 million currently to 1 billion by the end of the decade.
Mm-hmm.
And almost all of those are going to come from non-developed markets. So now all of a sudden I'm sitting in Ghana, right? Or in a village in India.
Yeah.
And I basically can write code and create stuff almost for free.
Right.
But so I think it's going to benefit everybody, but it's going to hurt people who refuse to reinvent themselves, which is why the book is called Rethinking Work.
Yeah.
So if you decide not to reinvent yourself, it's likely to hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
If you are wanting to do it, it's likely to help you. But the bias towards is it's going to help smaller companies more than it's going to help larger companies.
Mm.
And I have the ecosystem of the future will be some whales with a lot of plankton. Let me give you a whale plankton example. YouTube is a whale because it's owned by Google.
Yeah.
And basically, they apparently have $55 billion of business every year.
Yeah.
But the people who actually use them and create that stuff are creators.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the creators get, 70, 80% of the revenue.
Yeah.
So we are the plankton.
I see.
Okay. So it's the whales and the plankton working together.
I see. Yeah. Yeah.
Similarly, Amazon is a whale, but the people who use Amazon, web services or use their platforms to sell are plankton.
Right.
Okay. So in a world where you have things like AI, which is technology, marketplaces, gig, right? You begin to have this whole idea of whales and plankton. So whenever I tell somebody you're a very large company, I say, explain to me what the benefits of scale are to you these days.
Right. And you talked about acting like, big companies needing to act like small companies and so forth. But from a company perspective, where should they start to transform?
I believe every company should do 4 things. Okay. So one is ask yourself, why is it that you have only 3 types of employees in your company and maybe the future is a 4th type? So I call that the fractionalized employee. So what do I mean by that? Okay. So today in the US and in many countries, but I can't say every country, you can either be a freelancer, a contract worker, or an employee. Okay. And the difference between a freelancer is a freelancer, obviously, an employee is an employee. But a contract worker is someone who doesn't actually work for the company, but they work at the company 100% of the time. So majority of the employees of Google are not Google employees. Mm-hmm. They're contracted to Google from companies like Wipro and other places.
Right.
Okay. Now, in this new world where people are aging because of AI, you may not need to basically have 100% of employment. Why don't you have an employment where the person works 60 or 80% of their time, sort of like a part-time employee, but they basically get 100% of benefits, healthcare, stock, equity, aligned with how much they work. Obviously, 100% of healthcare. Now, in different countries, healthcare is already provided, but in places like the US, it isn't, right? But so what tends to basically happen is a new type of employee that allows you to dial up employees, dial down employees. As aging population happens, people can keep working for you. As people have kids, they can still work, but spend 20 to 30% less. That's number one. So what I call the fractionalized employee. The second one is what I call the unbundled distributed workspace. So a lot of people say, let's get back to the office. I basically believe the question should be, how do I maximize the benefits of in-person interaction, right? And for different groups of people, let's say you're joining a company, I might tell people if you're joining a company for the first 90 days, you have to be at the office 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Okay, because it's boot camp and indoctrination.
Yeah.
So the idea basically is how to rethink all the different places you can have in-person interaction. And a lot of us think about it as home and office, but there are also things like events, restaurants, bars, and experiences. How do you do that?
Yeah.
A third area, which I think is extremely important, is how do you retrain or how do you think about leadership in a different way? So leaders have basically been zone of control leaders. They're checking in with people. What are you doing? I'm delegating. But in this modern world, they're going to basically become zone of influence leaders. Okay. And zone of influence leaders is I'm going to lead through influence, through inspiration, through mentoring, building, and creating myself versus allocating, delegating, monitoring, and measuring. So one of my chapters is called The Fall of Old Managers and the Rise of New Leaders.
Right.
And then the last one is machine-human coexistence. Because the machines are going to be there, and how do we augment the machines? I think AI should have been called augmented intelligence. So how does augmented intelligence and human intuition work? So I would look at my company and say, okay, if I can have access to the latest technology, how much of my work and what should be done in today's processes with today's people? How much real estate do I need? Can I actually hire people from anywhere in the world? And how do I actually get them together once in a while to build cultures? How do I retrain my leadership to be zone of influence leaders versus zone of control leaders? And maybe I have to rethink my employment contract and think about it differently. Those are the real issues versus getting people back into the office.
So on that point, in the recent month or even a year, there's been a bit of a movement, especially in corporate America, of return to work. Return to office. What are they getting wrong? Are they making a mistake?
I think Amazon is making 3 massive mistakes, but the first thing they're doing is they're not making a mistake. The first thing that they're trying to do is they're trying to get rid of middle management without severance. Okay. So 6 weeks ago, they basically gave this thing, and I said, look, what they're trying to do is they want to have fewer middle managers, and middle managers are the ones who are most likely to have moved away from Seattle or New York City. Because if you're a younger person, you tend to want to go to work and you tend to live in the city, right? If you're very senior in the company, you can afford 2 or 3 different places sometimes. But middle management, you're bringing up a family, etc. You've moved out from with. So if I basically tell people you have to be 5 days in the office, it basically makes people say, how am I going to afford it? Do I have to sell my home? How do I commute? I'm living 2 hours away, all of that kind of stuff. So they say they quit. And when they quit, they don't have to pay them severance.
Right.
Okay. Now, yesterday or day before, they had another thing, which is why they want to eliminate middle management, which is what they were doing in the first place. Right? But what it did is it broke down trust. I spoke to Amazon, New York Amazon office 2 weeks ago. And I basically said, this is the stupidest thing I've heard. And if Jeff Bezos were going to start the company today, he would never do 5 days a week. Not for everybody. And everybody started clapping and cheering. There's great resentment with their management. Great resentment. Deep and great. Okay? Now, here's the other thing. Currently, they basically believe AI can replace some of these people and the job market is becoming soft. But the job market will not remain soft.
Right.
The best talent will leave. Okay? Microsoft does not have this 5-day-a-week rule. I think it's a failure of leadership. Okay? That's what it is. It's nothing else. And every company is now, company is saying, I'm going to monitor you 3 days a week. Right? Basically, they say, look, we don't trust you. Or they're basically saying, you're my slave and I own you all the time. And when you see the generational shifts, people are saying, who are these people? Right? And many of these senior people are hanging out in planes, in their private planes with other senior people, saying horrible things to each other, which has got nothing to do with the reality. They are missing everything. Right? And my whole stuff is get a grip on yourself. This is not where the world is going. No one today would start a company with 5 days a week unless they were a dentist's office.
Right. Or restaurant.
No one would do it. I asked these CEOs, if you started a company today, would you run it like this? They said, no. So I said, why are you going back to that? Your competitors and new companies are going to come with a blank sheet of paper. They're going to take away your talent. They're going to have a lower cost structure. They're going to have a global marketplace. And you're going to be doing what? 5 days a week for what?
Do you think they are doing it just to manage people out?
I think they're doing it for 3 different reasons. There may be more than this. One is it's a way to basically cull middle management. Second is because they really are having problem managing their people. If we physically get them into a little zoo, we can manage them easier than if we let them run in the jungle.
Right.
Okay. So they say instead of our lions and tigers being in the savannah, we're going to put them in a zoo. We can manage them easier this way. That's the second. But that's more of a failure of leadership than it is doing the right thing, right? The third, it is this. Many of them are starting to begin to realize that they've actually given birth to the exact thing that is going to come eventually to hurt them. So what do I mean by that? What does Amazon tell people? You can work anywhere in the world and access the greatest infrastructure called Amazon Web Services, and you can operate as a company of one. So they have, through Amazon Web Services and Amazon Marketplaces, allowed somebody to run a company anywhere in the world using their technology. At the very same stage, they talk about personalization. And at the very same stage, they tell all their people there's a one-size-fits model for everybody. Come back for 5 days a week, right? And by the way, we have big benefits of scale. By the way, those same benefits of scale are available now to everybody because you just allowed everybody to have Amazon Web Services and Amazon marketplaces. So in effect, what they are doing is they're basically becoming schizophrenic, right? And what they're selling and what they're doing are different. And when that happens, a company gets into trouble.
We shall see, say, a year from now where they might be.
We will see a year from now. But what I will basically tell you is everybody who's trying to do this are basically saying, we do not trust our employees. We are failed leaders, right? And we want to go back to 2019 when I'm basically saying, watch out, here comes 2030.
Who do you think is a good example of the 21st century workplace?
So in my book, I pull out some examples, and there are many examples, and I pull out examples of both small and medium and large and companies in different industries. Okay.
Yeah.
So I believe the companies that are planning well around those, so a company like L'Oreal, which is a knowledge work company, right? Basically are redoing their workplaces, redoing their programs, redoing their benefits to recognize that people are going to primarily spend their time, less than half their time in an office. So they're basically everything from the way they're looking at their footprint, redesigning structures, redesigning benefits, right? There's one of the things. Another company that's doing it well, some of the time, not 100%. So there's one thing that they're doing not so well by forcing people back in the office, not only 3 days a week, but on particular days, telling people they have to be there on Mondays and other kinds of stuff, but not necessarily right now still providing a reason why you have to be all there together at the office. Because most people go back to the office, put on headphones and look at their computers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in many other ways, Publicis is also doing a very good job because they let you work anywhere in the world, but you have to work in an office. They have a platform called Marcel, which allows people to plug and play and connect with everybody else in the world.
Oh, interesting.
And to a great extent, they sort of understand sort of different cultures. Right. And by the way, what most people don't realize is 1/3 of the employees of Publicis have contracts that allow them to work from anywhere. Right? So what tends to basically happen is, I think, a lot of companies, whether it's Automatic, which is a software company, which actually allows people to work anywhere, but 1 week of the year, they all come together in a physical location. And teams sometimes come together every quarter. So I give all these different examples. And again, it's not one size fits all, different industries, different cultures, right?
Yeah.
It's harder to work from home in markets like China and Japan when there's no space at home.
Right.
So there are all of these different things, but it's not just home. But the idea is, I always tell leaders, if you started with a blank sheet of paper with all of today's technologies and you had no rules excepting rules of the law, rules of integrity, and some financial rules, how would you create your company? And no one has created it the same way as they went in before.
Right.
So my simplest thing is, just pretend that you're starting your company again today, design that company, and then say, how can I become that company?
Yeah.
Versus anything else.
Right. So that was part one of my conversation with Rishad Tobaccowala, an author, speaker, teacher, and advisor with 4 decades of experience specializing in helping people, organizations, and teams reinvent themselves to remain relevant in changing times. As I mentioned in the introduction, Rishad speaks in bullet points, and if I wanted to, I could give you not just 3, but a list of 10 or even 20 takeaways. And before I share my top 3, let me summarize what Rishad means by seismic changes in the way we work. He says there are 5 shifts that companies need to be aware of. Those 5 shifts are societal shifts, technological shifts, market shifts, office shift, and a mindset shift. Societal, technological, market, office, and mindset shifts. Those are the 5 shifts that he's observing as we change the way we work. So based on those 5 shifts, he then says there are 4 things that every company should do. So today's key takeaway, instead of the usual 3, I actually would like to give you 4 takeaways from Rishad. So 4 things every company should do. Number 1, expand the types of employees. Number 2, unbundle distributed workplace. Number 3, develop modern leadership. And number 4, let machines and humans coexist. So number 1, expand types of employees. What he means by the types of employees is that the way we are hired by companies and the agreement and essentially the contracts that we have as an individual, as an employee with a company. And roughly speaking, there are 3 types of employment today. 1 is full-time employee, 2 is a part-time contractor, and 3 is freelancer. So employee, contractor, and freelancer, those are the 3 types of employment that we know today. And what he argues for is that companies moving forward need to be flexible about what types of employment we may offer to the individuals. In the past, say the past 75 years, which is the modern era of work as we have known, what we have done is to be quote unquote employed by a company, or a company would employ multiple individuals. And the companies would hold on to those employees for an extended period of time. Say in the US, maybe in the past, it may have been a decade or 2. It's gone down to say 5 years or even to 2 to 3 years or so. In Japan, where this podcast is produced, it was the norm that people would be employed for their professional career. So not just a decade, but potentially up to about 4 decades. But in the last decade or 2, that have gradually, but also more quickly in the last few years, expanded into contractors, which are part-time employees, and more recently, especially from COVID, freelancers who are now independent and they are working for multiple companies at the same time from different places. So in exchange, companies need to be flexible about the types of employment that we offer. On top of that, he says that we need to start thinking about what he calls fractionalized employee, meaning that we hired individuals on a contract and we may even give them, say, benefits and insurance so that they can maintain their well-being in terms of their life, but they might not be working for a given company 40 hours a week. They might have say 2 or 3 of those fractionalized employment that they hold with multiple employees. One of the 4 things that every company should do, the first thing is for the companies to expand the types of employment. Number 2, unbundle distributed workplace. So especially with COVID, what got accelerated was the ability for not only for the companies to connect with remote employees, but more importantly, employees to have the option and the flexibility to work from anywhere. The most common case may be that people work from home and they might telecommute to an office virtually, and then they might commute to the physical office once a week, twice a week, or even maybe once a month, let's say. But what's happening is that in some cases, and this is definitely an increasing trend, that individuals are opting, and this may be more true for younger generations who have, say, flexibility in terms of where they live, because they might not have the family obligation or education requirement for their, say, kids. So they have the flexibility to work from anywhere. So let's say in the US, they might be working for a company on the East Coast from Midwest, or they might be working for a company in California, but telecommuting from Mexico. Or in some cases, and actually this is the case in our situation where we have employees and these fractionalized employees in not only in the US, but also in Europe, in Japan, in Middle East, and other places around the world. So my company have adopted to this distributed workplace and distributed workforce so that we can leverage the talent that exists in different parts of the world. And the companies need to be comfortable with that kind of distributed workforce and unbundle the workplace that used to be concentrated in one place and open it up to different locations, different time zones, so that they can tap into the best talent that they can reach either directly or even virtually, so that whatever work that they produce can be the best quality that they wish for. So takeaway number 2, one of the 4 things that every company should do. Number 2 is unbundle the distributed workplace. Number 3, develop modern leadership. We need to shift the idea of what a boss is. Before, the role of a boss was to manage people. But increasingly, what's becoming important for managers is to become leaders who have zones of influence. So especially with the second point that he made, which is unbundling of the workplace, we might not be literally in the same office space to watch over the people that we manage. So instead, what becomes important is how effectively the managers can become leaders to influence these virtual employees and contractors and freelancers and other types of fractionalized employees in the most effective way. So the idea of management is gradually shifting into what he calls modern leadership. And that modern leadership is about creating your zone of influence for your subordinates. As COVID forced us to work remotely, one of the things that I think many companies have suffered, including my company, is the development of the company culture. When we used to work in a physical office, we would quite literally every day come together in the same place. We would have lunch together, we would have drinks together, we would have activities together. So creating culture and creating the direct human relationship between employees and the relationship between a manager and the member was able to form quite organically. But what happened with COVID and remote working becoming the de facto way of working, we lost that direct human connection with each other. And that also impacted the relationship that the managers and the bosses had with their members. So the employees and members may have gained more freedom, but at the same time, they lost the opportunity to grow by observing and learning directly from the bosses and the employees around. So in the modern day of working, especially when a lot of people have become remote, the managers has their zone of influence to affect individual in a positive way so that they can grow by taking in those inspirations from their leaders. So point number 3, develop modern leadership, focusing on creating that zone of influence for your employees. And that takes me to the last takeaway, 4 things every company should do. Number 4 is to let machines and humans coexist. He defines AI not necessarily as artificial intelligence, but as augmented intelligence. And over the past 2 years, just because we have started to use tools like ChatGPT, Claude.ai, Midjourney, Runway, and a plethora of other AI tools, that some of us have become quite comfortable in relying on these AI tools. But what we are increasingly finding out is that it's not just about letting AIs replace what you do, but what's really important and what's actually valuable for you as an individual is when you can use the AI tools to enhance the output, the way you work and the work you produce, so that the quality of that work becomes higher. Therefore, AI is quote unquote augmenting your intelligence as a worker, as an individual, so that what you were able to produce, say 2 years ago, was maybe slightly less quality, or even if it was the same quality, it would have taken you twice, 3 times, 5 times longer to produce that work. So for instance, just from my own experience, one thing that I recently realized was that I needed to assign a couple of copywriters and strategists on a project. It just turned out that one of the strategists wasn't available because they were too busy on other assignments. We were short of resources. So the immediate instinct that I had was, I need to either find somebody else within the company, or if we don't have that individual in the company, we need to hire a contractor or freelancer to do that work. But instead, I forced myself and my team to say, you know what, instead of hiring an additional person to do this work, could we rely on AI so that we don't have to hire that extra person, but then we can rely on AI to do more junior level work so that the senior people who can use AI to do some of the work, but also use AI to enhance and improve the quality of the output. And that's exactly what we did. And it's, in hindsight, it might sound obvious, but I was mesmerized and glad to have forced ourselves to rely on limited resources that we had, but produce the output that was as good, if not better, than, say, a team of people distributed in different places. So this idea of letting machines and humans coexist, it's something that I think we have to force ourselves to do, because otherwise our intuition and our habit tell us that, hey, you know what, let's go get a person to do this, or let's create a team to do this, or take this resource away from that work to this work to get that done. But instead, you can let them do what they're already doing, or not sacrifice the resources that we have, but rely on, say, ChatGPT and other plethora of tools that's out there to expand and augment the human work that we have. So to summarize the conversation with Rishad Tobaccowala, 4 things every company should do. Number 1, expand the types of employees. Number 2, unbundle distributed workplace. Number 3, develop modern leadership. And number 4, let machines and humans coexist. If you are listening to this on Spotify, there's a Q&A field, so please do send us your questions and comments. And if you like our podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating. We'll be so grateful. In the next episode, we focus on what the individual should do for our careers. He shares with us what he calls the 3-step relevance program, and it's something everyone can follow regardless of their experience or profession. So stay tuned. I'm Rei Namoto, and this is The Creative Mindset. See you next time.